There is a building material that costs almost nothing. It grows in every field across the American heartland. It has been tested in fires and past. It has been tested in earthquakes and past. It has been tested against mold, against wind, against time itself, and it passed every single test. Walls built from it are 18 inches thick. They stay warm in winter without a furnace running. They stay cool in summer without an air conditioner humming. They are quieter than any home you have ever lived in because 18 inches of packed fiber absorbs sound the way a canyon absorbs an echo. The material costs almost nothing because farmers pay to get rid of it. Every harvest season, hundreds of millions of bales are burned in open fields across the Midwest because there is no market for them, no demand, no buyer, except there was. For over 150 years, American builders used this material to construct homes that are still standing today. Homes that survived prairie fires, blizzards, and a century of Great Plains weather without a single structural failure. Homes that cost a fraction of what lumber framing cost, built by families with no construction experience, no architect, no contractor, and no permit, because no permit was required. The material is straw. And the reason you are not living in a straw house right now has nothing to do with performance. It has everything to do with who profits when you build with something else. The archive opens in the Nebraska sandhills in 1875. The treeless plains stretch in every direction. There is no lumber within 100 miles. There is no stone close enough to quarry. There is no brickyard within reach of a homesteader family that arrived with a wagon, a team of horses, and nothing else. What there is, in every direction, as far as the eye can see, is grass. Thick, dense, matted prairie grass that grows waist-high in summer and dies back to dry fiber in fall. And somewhere on those plains, a settler looked at the mechanical hay baler that had just arrived from the east, looked at the compressed blocks it produced, and understood something that would change the way an entire region sheltered itself. A bale of compacted grass is not loose material. It is compressed under hundreds of pounds of pressure and bound with wire. You cannot push your fist through it. It is, in every meaningful sense, a brick. A brick that weighs 50 pounds, costs the farmer nothing, and is produced by the millions as a byproduct of harvesting grain. The first straw bale homes were built in the Nebraska style, meaning the bales themselves are load-bearing. You stack them like oversized bricks, stagger the joints for strength, top them with a wooden plate and a roof, plaster the exterior with lime or clay to protect against moisture. The walls rise quickly. An entire family working together can raise the shell of a home in a week. The thermal performance came from physics that nobody had to study. 18 inches of densely packed straw fiber resists heat transfer with an insulating value between 30 and 35. A standard 2x6 lumber frame wall filled with fiberglass bat insulation achieves between 15 and 19. Code minimum in most cold climate states sits between 13 and 21. A Nebraska-style straw bale wall built by a homesteader in 1880 with no engineering degree and no insulation contractor outperforms the legally required minimum in modern American construction by nearly a factor of 2. Those homes are still standing. The Pilgrim Holiness Church in Arthur, Nebraska, built in 1928 entirely from straw bales, still stands today. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Families in the Nebraska sandhills still live in straw bale homes built by their great-grandparents. The walls have not rotted. The structures have not settled into ruin. They have simply continued to stand through blizzards and droughts and the full weight of 100 years of Great Plains weather. The material does not burn either. That is the fact that stops most people because it seems impossible. Straw is what you burn in bonfires. But loose straw and compressed bale straw are not the same material any more than loose sawdust, and a solid oak beam are the same material. A compressed straw bale has almost no oxygen inside it. Fire needs oxygen. When flame is held against the plastered surface of a straw bale wall, the plaster provides a barrier. If the straw itself is exposed, the compressed fiber chars slowly at the surface and self-extinguishes because there is no air inside to feed combustion. In 1993, the city of Tucson and Pima County commissioned a formal fire test on straw bale wall assemblies using the ASTME 119 standard, the same test used to rate fire resistance in conventional construction. The straw bale walls achieved a 2-hour fire rating. A standard wood frame wall filled with fiberglass insulation achieves a 1-hour fire rating. The material your building department is most likely to reject, without review, outperformed the material your building department requires you to use by a factor of 2. Structural tests passed, load-bearing tests passed, lateral load tests passed. Moisture tests passed with proper detailing. The science was not ambiguous. It was formal testing conducted by engineers and reviewed by building officials. And still, for most of the country, if you walk into your county building department today and say you want to build a straw bale house, the answer you are most likely to receive is no. Not because the material failed the tests, because the tests are not in the code, and what is not in the code does not exist. Now understand how building codes actually work, because this is where the story stops being about straw and starts being about something much larger. The International Building Code is updated every 3 years by the International Code Council. The International Code Council is not a government agency. It is a private organization whose members include building officials, but also industry representatives. Representatives from the concrete industry. Representatives from the lumber industry. Representatives from the steel industry. Companies that sell building materials help write the rules about which building materials are permitted. A wall made from straw bales harvested in a Nebraska field generates zero revenue for a lumberyard. It generates zero revenue for a concrete plant. It generates zero commission for a framing contractor. It cannot be ordered through any distributor. It cannot be financed because it has no recognized value in a mortgage appraisal. And what generates zero revenue for an industry has very little advocate inside the room where codes are written. The International Building Code contains no standard provisions for straw bale construction. It is not listed. It is not recognized. It does not exist in the primary document that governs construction across almost the entire country. If you want to build with straw bales, you must apply under the alternative materials provision. To use it, you typically need a licensed structural engineer to prepare calculations and specifications. Structural engineering fees for a residential project run between $5,000 and $15,000. You need soil testing. You need a detailed moisture management plan. You need load calculations reviewed by a second engineer in many jurisdictions. By the time you have assembled the engineering package required to legally build a home from material that costs almost nothing, you have often spent more money on professional fees than the entire material cost of the structure. The engineering approval alone costs more than the straw, and that is in jurisdictions willing to consider the application at all. In many rural counties across the Midwest, building officials simply decline, not because your home is unsafe, but because reviewing it requires work outside the standard routine, and the standard routine exists to process standard materials. The cruel irony is sharpest in the states where straw bale construction has the deepest roots: Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, Iowa. The states where prairie winds push heating bills to brutal heights, where straw is so abundant it is burned in fields as agricultural waste, where the original straw bale homes still stand as proof that the method works. These are the states where building code bureaucracy is most likely to refuse without review. Meanwhile, farmers in those same states set fire to leftover straw every fall because they have no use for it, because the market for straw as a building material does not exist at scale, because the building code does not recognize straw bale construction, because the building code was written by an organization whose members profit from the materials the code does recognize. Look at who benefits from that loop, and it stops looking like an accident. Now look at the numbers, because the numbers are where this story becomes impossible to dismiss. A conventionally framed two-bedroom home in the American Midwest costs between $120,000 and $180,000 to build in materials and labor as of 2024. That figure does not include land or site preparation. A straw bale home of equivalent square footage, built by the owner with hired help for technical stages, runs between $15,000 and $45,000 in materials. The straw itself, purchased directly from a farm, costs between $2 and $5 per bale. A typical small home requires 300 to 500 bales. The straw material cost for the entire structure runs between $600 and $2,500, less than the cost of a single interior door installation by a licensed contractor in a conventional home. And then, the operating cost. A straw bale home in a cold climate zone uses between 50 and 75% less heating energy than a conventionally framed home of the same size. That is not a marketing claim. That is the finding of monitoring studies conducted on occupied straw bale homes in Canada and the northern United States. The average American household spends between $1,200 and $2,000 per year on heating alone. Over 30 years, that is between $36,000 and $60,000 paid to a utility for heat that an 18-inch straw bale wall would have largely provided for free. The wall is a one-time cost. The heating bill is forever. Stack the fire test results. Stack the structural test results. Stack the 150 years of standing homes on the Nebraska plains. Stack the thermal monitoring data. Hold all of that evidence next to the column that says this material is not recognized in the standard building code. And what you are looking at is not a technical judgment. It is a financial one. A few people refuse to let the knowledge disappear. In 1991, builders and advocates in Tucson, Arizona, began organizing workshops, connecting owner-builders across the Southwest and pushing for formal code recognition. Their work fed directly into testing programs in New Mexico and Arizona, two states where the combination of abundant straw, extreme climate swings, and a tradition of owner-built construction made the political ground more favorable. Arizona became the first state to include straw bale construction in its residential code in 1996. New Mexico followed. California developed guidelines. These were not radical jurisdictions writing fringe law. These were states responding to documented evidence from formal engineering tests. In 2015, the International Residential Code added Appendix S, a set of voluntary provisions covering straw bale construction. Appendix S is not mandatory. States and counties must choose to adopt it. Most have not. But it exists inside the document, which means a building official in a jurisdiction that has adopted it can approve a straw bale home without requiring an alternative materials application, without requiring months of bureaucratic review. The pathway exists. The science exists. The 150 years of standing homes exist. What does not exist in most of the country is the political will to adopt the appendix that would make the pathway real. In Europe, the situation looks different. Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and Austria all have frameworks that allow straw bale construction to proceed with streamlined review. European builders use it commercially. Developers build multi-unit residential projects from straw bales in England and Germany. These are permitted, insured, mortgageable homes built to recognize standards. The United States, the country where straw bale construction was invented, where it has the longest documented history, where the climate case for high-performance insulation is overwhelming, lags behind the European regulatory framework for a building technique Americans pioneered. In the Arthur County Courthouse in Nebraska, there is a building made of straw bales, a courthouse, a government building, built in 1926, still in use today, still standing through nearly a century of Great Plains weather. The government of Arthur County conducts its official business inside straw bale walls every single day. And in most of the counties surrounding Arthur County, you cannot legally build a home from the same material without hiring an engineer whose fees exceed the cost of the straw by a factor of 10. The courthouse does not know it is supposed to be impossible. It is simply standing the way it has always stood, the way the Pilgrim Holiness Church in the same county has always stood, the way the homesteader houses built by families who arrived with nothing but a wagon and a field full of baled grass have always stood. The straw does not know it is not in the code. It just holds. What the housing industry sold America over the last 70 years is the belief that building is too complicated for ordinary people, that materials require professional handling, that walls require engineered systems and licensed installation and permitted construction, and that anything outside that sequence is dangerous or illegal. The Arthur County Courthouse is the answer to that argument. It was built by ordinary people from material they harvested themselves, and it has housed the legal and administrative functions of an American county government for nearly 100 years. The straw bale home does not threaten safety. It threatens the supply chain. It threatens the lumber yard and the insulation contractor and the energy company and the mortgage lender and the 30-year revenue stream that flows from a family that cannot afford to build any other way. A home that costs $15,000 to build and $50 a month to heat does not need a bank. And what does not need a bank cannot be controlled by one. What cannot be controlled cannot be priced. And what cannot be priced cannot generate the extraction that the entire modern housing economy is built upon. The building code did not exclude straw bale construction because it failed. The building code never included straw bale construction because including it would have required acknowledging that a material with no industry behind it, no distributor, no manufacturer, no lobbyist, outperforms the materials that do have all of those things in fire resistance, in thermal performance, in longevity, and in cost. That acknowledgement was inconvenient. So the alternative materials provision was left in place to give the appearance of an open door, while the engineering fees and the bureaucratic friction ensured the door never actually swung wide. There is a house in the Nebraska sandhills that is older than the grandfather of anyone watching this. It is warm in winter. Its walls are 18 inches thick, and they have never failed a load, and they have never caught fire, and they have never needed the kind of repair that a wood frame house demands every decade. It was built from waste material by a family with no construction credentials, no engineering degree, no building permit, and no mortgage. And somewhere in a field within sight of that house, a farmer is burning this year's leftover straw because he has no buyer for it, because the code does not recognize the wall it could build, because the wall it could build does not need the things the code was written to protect. The fire test results are still published. Appendix S is still in the code, waiting. The Arthur County Courthouse is still open. The straw is still growing. It grows every year in fields across every state in the American heartland, harvested and baled and burned or left to rot, because the system surrounding housing construction in this country decided, quietly, without a vote or a public announcement, that the most abundant, most affordable, best insulating building material on the American plains was simply not going to be part of the conversation. The pioneers had a different conversation. They had a field and a baler and a winter coming and walls to build before the snow arrived. They built them. The walls held. They are still holding. Before we close this blueprint, if these buried techniques matter to you, the best way to keep them from disappearing is simple. Subscribe to Buried Blueprints, hit the bell, and share this with someone who needs to remember what we were taught to forget. The next blueprint surfaces soon.